She ghosted him after their first date, thinking he was just too ordinary. A month later, she saw that same face everywhere across the city, under bold letters that read, CEO and founder. But what haunted her for the rest of her life wasn't his success. It was the realization that she had walked away from the only person who had ever truly listened to her. Sometimes, a single moment of silence is all it takes to lose everything. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting a golden glow across the tiny third-floor apartment of an aging brick building in Chicago. The clock on the wall ticked sluggishly, as if trying to stretch the silence that blanketed the room. On the faded grey sofa, Haley sat curled up, clutching a soft pillow, her gaze drifting aimlessly across her phone screen. She scrolled past faces on the dating app, one grinning widely, another striking a goofy pose, each one trying a little too hard to seem interesting. Swipe left, another face appeared, and again, an endless loop. Haley felt no connection to any of them. They all seemed noisy, distant, and far too easy. She didn't believe in a kind of love that could be born from a few swipes and carefully polished profiles. A soft sigh escaped her lips. "Haley, you have to at least give yourself a chance," Rachel's voice, her dearest friend, still echoed in her mind. "Just one date. You never know what you might find." She had promised she would try, though deep down, she'd never truly believed. The past had left invisible scars across Haley's heart. Times when trust had been betrayed, when vulnerability had only led to pain. Over time, she had built walls so high that even she could barely glimpse over them. Those walls kept her safe, but also achingly alone. Outside the window, the streetlights flickered on as streams of people hurried by, everyone with somewhere to be, someone to meet, a story to tell. Everyone but her, wrapped in the cold quiet of her own company. Her phone lit up with a new notification from the app. Rachel had set up everything for her, the profile picture, the bio. Designer who loves nature and quiet afternoons with a warm cup of coffee? It was short, accurate, but hollow. Haley tapped the new message. A stranger had reached out. "Hi Haley, I'm Jack. I really admire simple, natural designs. I bet someone who loves nature must have a lot of great stories to tell," as a plain, sincere message. No gimmicks, but Haley barely skimmed it before setting her phone face down on the table, as if it were a ticking bomb. Why was it so hard? It was just a message, just a hello, a smile, a courtesy. Yet for Haley, any step toward connection felt like navigating a minefield. She sat there, tapping her fingers against the arm of the sofa, lost in thought. Memories flooded back, times she had dared to love, dared to trust, only to be met with hollow promises and cold goodbyes. Silence, she had learned, was safer than hope. And yet, buried deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What if this time is different?" Haley stood and walked to the window, staring down at the street. Couples strolled hand in hand under the soft lamplight. Laughter burst from a group of friends spilling out of a nearby bar. The city thrummed with the life of those brave enough to open their hearts. Clenching her fists, Haley cursed her own unreasonable fear. She couldn't live like a ghost forever, hiding from life. Summoning every ounce of courage, she returned to the sofa and picked up her phone. She read Jack's message again, once, twice. Each word felt unbearably heavy. A deep breath. "Hi, Jack. Nice to meet you here." She typed the words, then hesitated. Her finger hovered over the send button. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. She deleted the message, turned off the screen, placed the phone face down on the table, and sat in silence once more. The room filled with the slow tick of the clock and the dim amber light of the desk lamp. The wall around her heart thickened another layer. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, trailing down the window pane like the tears Haley had long ago taught herself to swallow. That night, in the restless haze of sleep, Haley dreamed she stood before a great door. She knew that if she only pushed, it would open, but her feet refused to move and her hands trembled. Beyond that door could be happiness, or just another wound. She didn't know. And it was that very uncertainty that kept her frozen, nailed to the cold ground of fear. Somewhere in the night, the question echoed, "Have you ever pushed away something beautiful just because your heart wasn't ready?" Hayley had no answer. She only knew that when morning came, she would wake up alone again, swipe past more unfamiliar faces, and build her lonely wall a little higher still. The Saturday afternoon carried a tender chill, the first breath of autumn threading through Chicago's streets. Small cafes along the sidewalks began lighting their warm golden lamps, casting a soft glow into every quiet corner. Hayley stood before the glass door of the Velvet Bean, a vintage cafe draped in ivy and dotted with twinkling lanterns. She tugged nervously at her scarf, hesitating before finally pushing the door open. A soft chime sounded overhead. The rich scent of coffee and fresh pastries wrapped around her, soothing something restless inside her chest. She scanned the room and immediately caught a pair of eyes. Jack. He was already there, tucked into a corner table near the window, a coffee cup in one hand, tapping absent-mindedly on an open book with the other. He wore a simple olive green sweater. His dark hair was a little tousled, giving him an endearing, slightly clumsy air. When their eyes met, Jack smiled, a real smile, unpracticed and warm. Hayley nodded shyly and made her way over. "Hi, Hayley," Jack said, standing up, looking as though he might extend his hand, then thinking better of it and just smiling instead. "It's really nice to meet you." Hayley returned the smile, a flicker of her anxiety easing. They sat across from each other, and the date began. At first, the conversation was a little stiff, the usual exchange of safe questions, work, hobbies, favorite restaurants in Chicago. Jack spoke about his startup, a digital media platform for independent artists. "Most people don't realize that artists need their own space," Jack said, his eyes lighting up. "But I think they deserve to be heard, just like everyone else." Hayley sipped her cappuccino, studying him. He spoke with a slight awkwardness, sometimes straying off topic, but he never interrupted her. Whenever she shared something, even something as small as her love for photographing autumn leaves, Jack listened with genuine attention, without rushing to fill the space with his own stories. It had been a long time since Hayley felt truly heard. She found herself telling him about her passion for graphic design, how she loved arranging colors and shapes into silent stories, about early mornings spent sketching new ideas in quiet cafes, about her childhood dream of owning a tiny, sunlit studio of her own. Jack listened to every word, nodding, sometimes asking small, thoughtful questions that coaxed her to say more. Not once did he offer hollow advice or steer the conversation back to himself, the way so many others had. When she shared the story of almost spilling ink all over a major event poster once, Jack laughed, a low, easy sound like soft jazz threading through a quiet room. "I think," he said, smiling at her, "sometimes those disasters are how we figure out what really matters." Hayley couldn't help but smile back. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed so freely with someone new. Outside the window, the city glowed under a sunset washed in orange. Light pooled on their table, shimmering in little specks across their coffee cups. Time slowed, softened, and yet somewhere within her a small familiar unease stirred. Jack was kind, genuine, warm, but the spark, the dizzying, reckless feeling she'd always imagined love would bring, was missing. Her heart didn't race. She didn't feel the pull, the wild gravity she'd read about in books and dreamt about in sleepless nights. Was Jack too simple? Too safe? Hayley didn't know. She only knew that some deep part of her still longed for something fiercer, something messy and consuming. "Hayley," Jack's voice gently pulled her back. "Oh, sorry," she said with an embarrassed laugh. "I was just daydreaming." "That's okay," Jack said, smiling. "I'm a daydreamer too." They both chuckled, the tension easing. Between them, a silence settled, not heavy but comfortable, the kind that didn't demand filling. When the date ended, they rose to leave, Jack looking at her with a sincerity that made Hayley's chest tighten. "I'm really glad we met today," he said. "I hope we can do this again." Hayley smiled and nodded, a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They shared a brief, courteous hug before parting ways, each walking into the crisp autumn night. The wind stirred the dry leaves along the sidewalk in soft, restless sighs. Hayley walked slowly, her heart heavy with a sadness she couldn't fully name. Jack was good, so good, and yet she felt like she was letting something beautiful slip through her fingers simply because it didn't ignite her the way she thought it should. But how could you force a heart to feel what it didn't naturally feel? She pulled her coat tighter around her as a gust of wind crept through. In her bag, her phone buzzed with a new message. "I had a wonderful evening. Hope to see you again soon." Hayley didn't open it. She kept walking, letting the city's quiet murmur and the whisper of the autumn wind fill the empty spaces inside her. Hayley curled up on the sofa, the phone lying face down on the table before her, as if its weight alone had thickened the very air around her. The message was still there. She had read it the moment she got home, a simple, ordinary line. "I had a wonderful evening. Hope to see you again soon." And yet those plain words felt unbearably heavy tonight. Hayley hugged a pillow tight against her chest, clinging to it like a frail shield against the rising tide inside her. She tilted her head back, staring at the ceiling where the soft, yellow light from the lamp barely held the darkness at bay, unable to chase away the growing chill in her heart. Inside her, a silent battle raged. Part of her wanted to pick up the phone, type a few easy words back, smile and give herself a chance, with Jack, who had spent an entire afternoon listening to her without judgment or haste. But another part, louder and sharper, whispered its cruel warning. Don't be foolish. It will end the same way it always does." Hayley pressed her face into the pillow and let out a long, trembling sigh. She thought back to the date, the way Jack smiled, the honest questions he asked, the way he tilted his head when she spoke, about the smallest things as if they mattered deeply to him. He wasn't smooth or dazzling. He was a little clumsy, a little awkward, but in his presence Hayley had felt seen, truly seen. And still she wasn't sure. Something was missing. That spark she had always believed love was supposed to ignite. That sudden, breathtaking blaze. And Jack, with all his gentle sincerity, hadn't struck that match. Was that enough reason to walk away? Was the absence of heart-pounding thrill justification to refuse someone who had shown her nothing but kindness? Or was it simply that her heart no longer knew how to let anyone in? Her phone vibrated again, a meaningless notification from another app, but it made her startle, heart-pounding, as if it might have been Jack. It wasn't. No new message, just the one he'd already sent, waiting there, patient, unassuming. Hayley reached out, fingers trembling slightly as she unlocked her phone. She opened the thread. Jack's message remained, solitary and small, like a delicate flower blooming alone in the desert. She began to type. "I had a wonderful time too. It was really nice to meet you." Her hand hovered. The words stared back at her, terrifying in their ordinariness. A surge of panic rose within her. If she sent this message, it meant opening a door she had spent years keeping tightly shut. She stared at the screen. Memories crashed down. Memories of unanswered texts, ghosted dates, betrayals disguised as promises. She couldn't bear another disappointment. No. 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 Hayley deleted the message. The screen went blank again. She dropped the phone onto the table and curled deeper into herself, drawing her knees up as if trying to vanish into the fabric of the sofa. Silence. This time no one needed to ghost her. She had ghosted herself. Jack would not receive a reply. Maybe he would be hurt. Maybe he would be disappointed. Or maybe he would simply move on, forgetting the quiet girl who had slipped away without a sound. Hayley told herself she had done the right thing. That if something real had been meant to grow between them, a single unanswered message wouldn't have stopped it. But deep down, she knew what she had lost wasn't Jack. It wasn't even the chance at a new romance. It was the chance to be brave. She gazed out the window. Beyond the glass, the autumn wind scattered the last brittle leaves across the pavement. The city pulsed on, indifferent to small, tender stories like hers and Jack's. Hayley pressed her forehead against her knees and closed her eyes. Once again, she chose silence. Once again, she chose solitude. And this time, the silence wasn't freedom. It was a prison. And without even realizing it, Hayley had locked herself inside. A month slipped by. Hayley sank back into the relentless grind of work, buried under deadlines and sleepless nights spent in the glow of her laptop. The days blurred into one another, a long, grey string of monotony. She tried not to think about Jack. Easy enough, she told herself. They had barely started. One message, one date, one smile. It was too thin, too fragile to hold on to. So why, in the late hours of the night, when the city settled into silence, did she feel an aching hollow grow quietly inside her chest? She didn't know. Then, on a dreary Thursday morning, everything shifted. Hayley hurried along the sidewalk, clutching her bag, her shoulders hunched against the early winter wind, lashing at her face. She was late for a morning meeting, a critical presentation for a design project she'd spent weeks preparing. Her music shuffled through her headphones. She barely registered the world around her, until a giant shadow swept across the pavement, pulling her gaze upward, and in that instant, Hayley froze. Towering above the skyline of grey high-rises, a billboard blazed, a slash of colour against the washed-out sky. On it, a familiar face smiled down, confident, composed, Jack. Gone was the soft olive sweater, the endearing awkwardness of the boy from the cafe. On the billboard, Jack wore a sleek grey suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his gaze sharp and steady as a conqueror's. Behind him, a metallic blue backdrop framed bold white letters, Jack Donovan, CEO and founder of J.D. Ventures. Coming soon, J.D. Connect, a new era in digital media. Hayley stood there, stunned. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Jack, the same man who had sat across from her, fumbling with his coffee, listening to her every word. Jack, the man she had dismissed as too ordinary, lacking drive, not enough spark, was about to shake up an entire industry. The city noise, the blare of horns, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, the calls of street vendors faded into a dull, muted hum, as if someone had turned down the volume. On the world. All Hayley could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Shock, regret, disbelief, all of it surged inside her, dizzying and raw. She gripped a lamppost to steady herself. She looked up again at the billboard. Jack's face beamed against the grey sky. His eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her across a small cafe table, warm and kind, now burning with certainty and ambition. Something inside her cracked. She felt impossibly small, too small even to reach him now. But it wasn't Jack's success that gutted her. It wasn't the money or the fame or the gleaming title under his name. It was the knowledge that she had walked away from someone genuine, someone who in one fleeting afternoon had given her the rare and precious feeling of being seen, of being understood, of being safe. And she had let fear drive him away. She had let invisible expectations, ones she barely understood herself, build a wall between them. She hadn't just lost Jack. She had lost the chance to step beyond the walls of loneliness she had so carefully built around herself. The wind picked up, scattering brittle leaves across the street. Hayley pulled her coat tighter, her eyes stinging. Whether from the cold or from something deeper, she couldn't say. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Rachel. "Did you see it yet? It's that guy you went on a date with." Attached was a photo. The billboard captured from across the street. Jack's radiant smile frozen in pixels. Hayley bit down hard on her lip. She pressed the phone's screen dark and shoved it deep into her pocket. She didn't want to respond. She didn't want to explain. She didn't even want to admit to Rachel or to herself that she had been wrong. Wrong about Jack. Wrong about the fragile, trembling hope she hadn't dared to trust. She had let fear drown out something real, something that might have saved her from herself. The rain began, a misty drizzle that pricked her skin like needles. Hayley stood there, surrounded by the restless tide of strangers, staring up at Jack's face, now a symbol of everything she could no longer touch. and in that moment she understood. Silence is a choice, and sometimes the price of silence is forever. Haley turned and melted into the crowd, her steps light but her heart unbearably heavy. Inside her something shifted, quietly, irreversibly. Night fell heavy over Chicago, a dense black velvet shroud smothering the restless city. But inside Haley's tiny apartment, the desk lamp still cast its thin, weary light, flickering as if it might surrender at any moment. Haley lay motionless, on her bed, eyes wide open, staring at the white ceiling. Shadows from the bare trees outside played across the plaster, swaying like restless ghosts. She couldn't sleep. The clock on her nightstand blinked 3 a.m. in harsh red digits, a relentless reminder that another hour had slipped past. Unrecoverable, she squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself into sleep. But the moment her lids closed, Jack's face swam into view, so vivid it hurt. Jack with his awkward, warm smile, Jack with the way he had listened to every stray thought she shared, as if each word mattered. Memories of that afternoon, the cozy glow of the cafe, the scent of baked bread curling through the air, Jack's soft laughter, flooded her senses like a torrent, leaving her adrift. Haley tossed and pulled the blanket over her head, but the memories clung to her, relentless. She remembered the look he had given her as they left the cafe, a small, fragile hope shining in his eyes, a hope that could have been held alive with nothing more than a single word from her. And she had extinguished it with silence, as thoughtlessly as snuffing out a candle in the wind. She bit down on her lip, tasting the bitter tang of regret. It wasn't about Jack's success. It wasn't about the billboard or the glossy title. It was about Jack, the boy in the olive green sweater, offering her something almost no one did anymore, his full, undivided presence. In a world obsessed with shouting over one another, Jack had simply listened, and she, foolish and scared, had turned away, not because of anything grand or tragic, because of a vague, stupid feeling that there wasn't enough spark, that it wasn't electric enough. Ideas she had absorbed over years of watching movies and scrolling through polished fantasies of love. She had believed love would strike like lightning. No one had ever told her that sometimes real love comes not in a blaze of thunder, but as soft rain falling on a rooftop, patient and unseen. Haley opened her eyes. The ceiling above her stared back, blank and merciless, a mirror to the truth she had spent so long avoiding. She wasn't afraid of Jack. She was afraid of herself. Afraid to open up, afraid to give, afraid that if she let someone in, they would only leave and tear new wounds deeper than the old ones. But in the silence of the past month, Haley had begun to realize silence could wound too, not just others, herself. She sat up, folding her arms around her knees, pressing her forehead to her hands. The apartment was so still she could hear her heartbeat, fast, chaotic, confused. She reached for her phone. No new messages, no missed calls. Of course not. Jack had no reason to wait for her anymore. She opened their old thread. The last message, simple, kind, still sat there like a monument to everything she had thrown away. I had a wonderful evening. Hope to see you again soon. She pressed her fingers to the screen, as if she could reach back into a past already lost. A tear slid down her cheek, salty and sharp, not for Jack's fame, not for the success splashed across a billboard, but because in a world where everyone wore masks, Jack had come to her barefaced, offering nothing but sincerity, and she had been afraid of it. She had run from it. Again. Haley sighed and stared out the window. Outside, the sky was a vast, starless black. Wind howled through the empty spaces between the buildings, rattling windows and slicing through the cracks. But somewhere deep inside her, something shifted. Quietly, almost imperceptibly. A small, frail desire to be different, a desire to change, not in grand, sweeping ways but in tiny, stubborn steps. A desire, however faint, to try, to not choose silence next time. The night stretched long and sleepless. Haley stayed awake, but this time, it wasn't just loneliness that kept her up. It was the slow, patient beginning of a reckoning, a tiny breath of wind slipping through the fractures in her fortress. Not enough to break the walls, but enough, maybe, to start. That morning, the sky over Chicago was a smudged, tired gray, as if dusted over by a fine layer of ash. Haley pulled her coat tighter around her and hurried along the rain-slicked sidewalks, stepping over puddles left by the night's storm. Her heart hammered in her chest. Since waking from that sleepless night, she had made a decision to show up for the creative design conference her company required them to attend. At first, it was just to tick a box. But now something deeper stirred inside her, a small, stubborn need to do something, anything, that wasn't simply hiding. The convention hall was larger than she'd expected. Pale blue-white lights washed over hundreds of restless faces. The buzz of hushed conversations, the clatter of laptop keys, the occasional flutter of laughter, all wove together into a low, expectant hum. Haley found a seat near the back, silently wishing to disappear into the crowd. An MC walked onto the stage and began introducing the keynote speaker. Haley only half listened, her mind distracted by half-formed ideas for new projects, until a name cut through her fog like a blade. Jack Donovan, CEO and founder of J.D. Ventures. Haley froze, every muscle locking tight. She looked. The spotlight hit the stage, and then he stepped out. Jack Gone was the boy in the rumpled sweater and endearing smile. On stage, he wore a simple white shirt, sleeves casually rolled up, a quiet confidence radiating from him, unforced, unpretentious, steady. A different Jack, and yet, somehow, still unmistakably him. Haley forgot to breathe. Jack opened his talk with a story about the early, clumsy days of starting his company, the failures, the long nights spent questioning every choice he'd made. He spoke plainly, without bravado, without dressing it up. His words poured out honest and unvarnished, sinking deep into the room like rain soaking dry earth. Haley was drawn in before she even realized it, until, midway through his speech, Jack's gaze swept across the audience and stopped, right on her. For one suspended second, the world dropped away. No one else noticed. Just them, two people stitched together by a glance weighted with everything left unsaid. Haley felt her heart twist. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He simply paused, barely a heartbeat, his eyes holding hers with a quiet, resigned tenderness. And then he smiled. A small, fleeting smile. Light as a sigh, and moved on. Jack shifted into the final part of his talk. His voice slowed, deepened, each word landing with deliberate care. Sometimes, Jack said, his eyes no longer searching the room, but gazing into a distant, invisible horizon. The person who changes you isn't the brightest or the loudest or the one who sweeps you off your feet. Sometimes, he went on, they're the one who makes your silence feel like it matters. The hall fell utterly silent. No keystrokes, no whispers, no nervous coughing, only stillness, as if each person there had been called inward, facing the hollow places they usually outran. Haley's throat tightened. Those words, so simple, unadorned, sliced through her like tiny, merciless arrows. Silence. Her silence. Her choice to walk away instead of leaning in. Her fear disguised as indifference, and yet, even as they stung, those words opened something fragile inside her, an understanding that silence could be broken if she dared. Jack closed with a brief thank you, bowed slightly, and walked off stage. No lingering glances, no waiting, no pleading, just a quiet farewell that seemed to say, I respect your choice, but you are allowed to choose again. Thunderous applause filled the hall, but Haley stayed frozen in her seat. Tears blurred her vision, slipping hot and fast down her cheeks. Not from sadness, not from regret, but because for the first time in what felt like forever, she had touched something true and raw inside herself. She could stay silent, she could keep running, but she could also, maybe just this once, choose to step forward, even if her heart trembled, even if her past screamed, even if the future loomed uncertain. Just once was enough. When Jack stepped off the stage, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, but Haley remained frozen in her seat, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. Jack's final words still echoed in her mind, carving themselves deep into the tender spaces of her heart. The one who changes you isn't special because they shine the brightest, but because they make your silence unforgettable. Haley stayed seated long after the auditorium began to empty, people gathering their bags and murmuring their goodbyes. She sat still, feeling the smallest, most fragile crack begin to form in the towering wall she had spent years building around her heart. And from that crack, an idea emerged, hazy but stubborn. She couldn't stay here forever. She couldn't let fear chain her in place again. So Haley stood. Her legs trembled slightly as she made her way out of the hall, but with every step, her resolve grew, a little stronger. Outside, a thin layer of pale sunlight spread across the rain-damp sidewalks, painting the city in a quiet, tender light. Haley walked quickly, her mind empty of everything except one destination: the Velvet Bean. The familiar chime of the cafe door greeted her as she pushed it open. The warm scent of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries wrapped around her, instantly mingled with the faint, comforting smell of old oak furniture. Haley made her way to the same small table by the window, the place where she and Jack had sat that first afternoon. The sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, laying gentle golden stripes across the tabletop. She sat down and set her bag beside her. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a small piece of paper and a simple pen. She inhaled deeply. There was no need for grand speeches, no flowery apologies, just the truth. And so Haley lowered her head and slowly wrote, "I was silent before, but this time I hope to listen to you." Her pen stilled. She stared at the simple, honest words, feeling her heart thudding against her ribs. This wasn't just a note. It was surrender, not to fear, but to the aching, stubborn desire to live honestly, even if it left her exposed. Haley folded the paper in half and placed it carefully on the table. She ordered a cappuccino to go, glancing nervously at the folded note, afraid that if she looked away for even a second, she might lose her nerve. But she didn't. When the barista called her name, Haley took her coffee, drew a deep, steadying breath, and walked out, leaving behind the small note, nestled beside a single sprig of dried baby's breath tucked into a tiny glass jar. That afternoon, Jack returned to the Velvet Bean, a ritual of his before big meetings. A way to clear his mind, he chose the same table, the one by the window, bathed in soft golden light. As he pulled out his chair, he noticed something, a neatly folded slip of paper resting on the table. Jack frowned slightly, curious. He picked it up, unfolded it. Read. And in that moment, the noise of the cafe, the shuffling of papers, the low murmur of conversation, all of it faded away. "I was silent before, but this time, I hope to listen to you." A smile flickered across Jack's lips. Not a victorious smile, not a bitter one. Just a small, quiet smile, gentle and warm, the smile of someone who understood that everything meant to be would find its way in its own perfect time. Jack folded the note carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. He sat down, gazing out the window, the soft light spilling over the sidewalk, glinting like little shards of gold across the worn oak of the table. Quiet, ordinary moment, and yet a beginning, silent, unassuming, and full of hope. Sometimes we let silence fill the spaces that should have been filled with courage. Sometimes fear makes us turn away from the beautiful things waiting just ahead. But all it takes is one moment, one small act of bravery, to reclaim the tea. Most precious connections believe this. No matter how late it seems, sincerity will always find its way to be heard. And sometimes, just one small reply is enough to change everything. Thank you for staying with this story until the very last moment. If it touched your heart, please give us a like, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue spreading stories filled with warmth and hope. We promise to keep bringing you heartfelt emotional journeys, crafted just for you. See you in the next story.